Welcome back to this latest episode of Japan's Top Business Interviews. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Story, President, Dale Carnegie Tokyo Training. My specialist today is Dave Michels, who is the managing partner of a very famous company, Bain & Co. Dave, welcome. And I looked at your resume. You are 100% pure gold, Bain. It's Bain, Bain, Bain all the way through. Because at the end, when we published the podcast, we put a little brief mini bio on people. I'm looking at yours going, wow, this guy's pure gold here with Bain. So you've been with the company a very, very long time. It looked like from basically, you graduated from Duke, or I guess the Americans say Duke University, and then you joined Bain from there and you did your PhD, or not PhD, you did your Masters of Business at MBA at Harvard, and that was while you're at Bain and then back into Bain. So you've been with Bain for a very long time. So here's a question. How is it that you're in Japan? How is it that you've been working here? Now you're the managing partner. And I'm not sure about the consulting companies. Is that partnership an election to have you as managing partner, or are you appointed managing partner? How does that work in your industry? Because I was interviewing someone from the legal profession, and they're a managing partner too, but it's an elected role. I didn't realize that. 5 years as a cycle. So is yours an elected role, or is this an appointed role?
It's a bit of a combination of both. So we call it a servant leader role.
Ah, okay.
What we take great pains to preserve in our culture is that the frontline client-facing partners is at the apex of our firm. We want to emphasize external orientation. Now, of course, we're a business too, and we have to run it. And so we have a handful of what we call rotational servant leader roles. That depending on the role, in this particular one for managing partner of Japan, it's a process where there's a number of interviews done with the partners here, as well as a handful of partners in Asia Pacific. We have a global committee that also approves that input and that recommendation. It's not a straight election in the sense that you would think of in terms of the politics, that world, but it gathers inputs from a number of partners, and then an appointment is then made based on that input. Right. And it is a rotational model, right, and it is explicitly set up to be a servant leader sort of model, where you are a servant of the partnership asked to serve for a period of time.
Right, okay, because I'm just interested to get the difference. And so, you know, we see your resume is just amazing. It's Bain, right? True blue Bain.
Well,
and
didn't think it'd be that way, actually.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Yeah, you joined early and you've stayed. So, you know, you've been very successful within the organization. I mean, it's a very famous brand, and you know, it's done tremendous work around the world, many, many years. So, how about Japan, though? How is it that you wound up in Japan? Because you spent a lot of time in Zurich. It seemed to be a lot of time in Zurich and operating from there. But it's, with your organization, I guess it's rather, everything's global, isn't it? You might be based somewhere, but you're actually a plane somewhere going somewhere else most of the time, it seems to me. But anyway, how is it that Japan popped up on your radar to come and work here, to live here?
It's a very good question, Greg, because it's not so straightforward why a lad like me would end up here in Japan. The short answer is sense of adventure. The slightly longer answer around that is that both my wife and I are very globally minded and fairly adventurous, both professionally as well as personally. We have 4 children. Our children, I would say, are probably characterized as being third culture kids.
Right.
Their formative years were growing up in Switzerland in the international school system. We spent first third of our career in the U.S., second third of the career in Europe, and we always had an idea that, you know, nearly 2/3 of the human beings on this planet are in Asia, and living and working somewhere is different than traveling there. And so we had the idea of at some point spending some time in Asia. Now, a few years ago, when that time became right for us personally and professionally, and we started looking towards the East, Japan wasn't the first place that we looked, simply because I'm not Japanese. And so my assumption was, well, in a place like Korea or Japan or China even as well, for that matter, what can I possibly do? And so I was thinking more of the usual suspects of a Hong Kong or a Singapore or something like that. Australia is a little bit far away. I had been in global roles for a while. That would make it a little bit tough. And, you know, after having lived many, many years in Switzerland, and we naturalized there, became citizens there, it's so safe and there's a certain quality of life there for children. I'm not sure they were ready for the adventure that would have been India, where I did live a half a year actually earlier in my career.
This is Mumbai, yeah?
Yes, that's right. In Mumbai, yeah, that's right. And so Japan wasn't really on my radar screen for that reason. And then some folks at our firm, when I started engaging in the conversation about moving to Asia, suggested, what about Japan? I said, well, what about Japan? Japan's a lovely place, but I'm not Japanese. What do you have in mind? I said, well, it's actually our number one geographic priority in the region. And we need people there. You'd be a great fit. And, things are changing slowly. So we do think that you can have impact there. Why don't you go check it out before saying no? So I had nothing against Japan. It was just simply that I don't have ties and otherwise to Japan.
You were canceling yourself out.
I was canceling myself out. And so we came here to look around, and we really fell in love with it. Actually, I said the professional challenge as well as then the personal challenge. The kids and my wife were really thought it was terrific. And so got very excited to come here. And that's the story of how we ended up here. It's been 3 years now, and we plan on about 3 years more.
3 years more. Wow. And you've, in your work, your professional work, you are, I guess, constantly forming project teams for specific work, and then they break apart and new teams form for a new piece of work. So you're project based for a lot of what you do.
That's right.
But you still have to organise a lot of coordination across the firm. And one of the great things I think that the consulting industry does very well is you capture a lot of learning. So you're not constantly reinventing the wheel. You've got a lot of detail on how things work in different industries and different countries around the world. So you can, based on that, hit the ground running at a very high level. So you have team members here, and then obviously you have team members around the world as well. And I'm sure the Japanese are being part of teams as well and going into the States or other parts of Asia or America, or Europe, I should say. So it's a little bit of a unique business in the sense of the team is probably not permanent that you're running because it keeps changing, which I guess in itself is a little bit of I would suggest maybe challenging perhaps, but I'd be interested to hear about your views on that. And then I want to hear a little bit more about some of the differences you noted when you came to Japan and started running a team here of Japanese, what was different about that? And then also I want to hear about, I interviewed Jessup Cole, who you know is a very famous economist here and has been chief economist of a number of big banks here. And I asked him about, well, a lot of these analysts are real prima donnas. Jessup, these are superstars. These are serious people, How do you manage these people? We had a conversation about that. It was very interesting. And I guess it's a little bit like that for you too. We'll hear about that later. But a lot of your analysts, your consultants are very, very smart people. They're very confident. They're very capable. And trying to lead that type of caliber of person, I'm sure is not easy. So let's hear a little bit about the early days when the things are different here. And then let's talk a little bit about some of the difficulties of leading very, very high-level people. So what were some of the things that stuck you when you got here about, this is a little bit different, or this is interesting, or this is a bit surprising when you started leading a Japanese team here?
Yeah, sure. Great question. So there are several questions in there. Let's take them one by one. So first, what was surprising, or what did I notice? Well, the simple answer to that is actually one that everybody here will know who has traveled abroad, which is that the differences within Bain really weren't very meaningful. The differences were because you had a group of people that were 90+% Japanese versus the market I came from, which was a group of people who were 90% Swiss and German. And so those national stereotypes, doesn't matter if they're in a Bain company or any group, are going to lead to some differences. And those are differences that people know pretty well. So the things, of course, that I was confronted with at the beginning, which someone like you will know very, very well, I was expecting to some degree, but things like you don't hear no very much. The emphasis on detail and
just on the flip side of
specificity
that,
is very strong.
Just on the flip side of that, do you hear yes all the time?
You probably hear yes a little too often, actually. A little too often. Kashiko karimashita, hai, and sometimes I'm not ready to hear that yes yet, and I'm not so sure exactly what that yes means.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So a lot of those fun cultural stereotypes, I find that, the attention to detail, the rigor of project management and planning and so forth is very high. At the same time, the ability to deal with ambiguity and to focus very quickly on what's most important, which requires you to leave a few things that are less important to the side. So the 80-20 Pareto principle approach,
Or some prioritization.
a little difficult, I think, not as prominent in the education system here, and so a little more difficult. A little more hierarchy, that I had been used to. Gender mix, I knew, but that's a difference.
So that 90%
question.
Japanese team would be how many men versus how many women when you arrived?
Majority men. Not as much as 90%, but up there like 70% or so.
So it's quite a big proportion, yeah.
It's quite a big proportion, too big. And the female part of the organization skewing to the more junior levels, which is common that I find here. So those things were all different in ways.
Did you find that you made the point about planning and project management, and I had a bit of a wry smile inside my mind here. Recently I visited one of the very big banks in Japan here talking about training, and they showed me their training sort of overview. My God, it's so complex. It's like, wow, okay. And that tends to be something I think Japan loves in some regard, that complexity. How did you find, sometimes you think, wow, are we overdoing this? Is this just making this too complex? We can actually simplify this? Because that attention to detail, that fear of making a mistake, get everything in there, cover every base, is very strong in the culture here. So did you also find that there's a little bit of a downside to being a bit too well organized, and maybe to some extent?
On a regular basis.
Oh, okay.
On a regular basis.
Right.
So I don't, I've been around long enough to know that there's pros and cons of every situation, and there's trade-offs and everything, and nobody's perfect. So there are some elements, cultural elements in Japanese business and Japanese corporations which are not helpful in terms of speed and innovation and creativity and so forth when you're benchmarking against their global competition. That's true. And, we can talk more about that. At the same time, it is also true that many of those same roots behind those cultural attributes and traits have many positive things in there too. So you look around the society here and how harmonious it is and how polite it is and how respectful it is.
How everything works here.
How everything works here and so forth.
There's rubbish on the street and everything's taken care of.
That's right. You know what, Greg? So every time that I maybe am frustrated in a boardroom by the speed of the decision-making or the lack of clarity or the conservatism that seems to be overwhelming sometimes, that sense of conservatism, I try to work through it, but then I also try to remind myself, but you know what? If it wasn't for that, maybe we wouldn't have the unbelievable civility that you see day to day in this society, which the world probably needs more of. So, there's some puts and takes here.
So I guess also, coming from, you said last third of your work life had been in Zurich, I guess, in Switzerland. So I've not actually, I don't know why I've not made it to Switzerland yet. I got pretty close, got to Austria, been to Italy, but didn't get to Switzerland. But I'm imagining that, there are a lot of similarities culturally, perhaps, in terms of attention to detail, everything works well, reliability, loyalty, precision, on time, that type of thing. So that's my stereotypical image of Switzerland. I guess Japan, for you in that sense, was probably in some ways a little bit familiar.
You're spot on. In fact, I think that's one of the things that got my family so excited about Japan, because on the one hand, there's that sort of safety net of things that you just described, which you come to appreciate being Swiss. And at the same time, culturally, it's so different in so many other ways that you still have that sense of adventure that's in front of you. I'd say probably at the top of the things that are different, all the things you said are exactly right. The things that are different in the world of business is that you've heard the expression about high context cultures and low context cultures. Well, on those maps of the world, Japan is at the one end of the spectrum on high context, and Switzerland, specifically Swiss German, or the German-speaking part of Switzerland, which is where I was in Zurich, is at the other end of that spectrum.
Right, okay, that's interesting.
Very direct, very literal, just entirely different
Black and
form
white.
of communication. Yes, that's right.
Whereas Japan is totally grey.
Totally gray. Totally gray. And yes, that's right.
Yeah. So when you started leading a team here, and you mentioned all those differences and those, I mean, you've got very smart people working with you. And then you become managing partner. You became managing partner reasonably quickly. I mean, you, as you say, 3 years and bingo, you're actually running the whole show. So talk a little bit about that, because I'm interested in how it was that you had a sense of adventure. That's pretty adventurous. Okay, yes, I'll go to Japan, and yes, while I'm there, I'll take over the whole place. And then what was that like, becoming the managing partner from having been a colleague? And then I know you got your servant leadership concept, but still you're a colleague to become the head. So what was that transition like?
I thought it was particularly interesting for me not being Japanese. I think
had they not had a non-Japanese head?
They
before?
had, but it had been many years ago.
Oh,
long time ago.
Interesting.
So in fact, Greg, to the point, so I had been here a year. I was here a year before I was made managing partner. And that first year that I was here, I did not come here actually for that purpose. I came here with some other missions, including to help to coach and support the partner team, but not to become the managing partner. I had assumed, again, my own assumption, that should be Japanese. Now, it still maybe is not a crazy assumption, and in the long term, it's the right answer. But one of the things that I learned as I was asked to transition into that role. First of all, I wanted to say, are you sure you want a non-Japanese guy to do this? What I started to learn is that while there's lots of disadvantages that I have not being Japanese, and those are very evident with language and culture and so on and so forth, and context. At the same time, there were a number of advantages that I had not being Japanese, which I have to say, I didn't fully understand at the very beginning. So coming with, a few decades of experience in the Bain system, in other offices, having seen other markets grow from small to medium to large and go through that transition, as you were mentioning earlier, being able to tie into global expertise and IP and so on and so forth is so important to our value proposition. Just having gone through a lot of those experiences in the system is helpful. And then I'll even go out on a ledge and say that sometimes it's helpful not being Japanese and having history here simply because I do not have any, I don't have any things that I owe anybody. I don't have any baggage.
Restraints are less.
I don't have any restraints or anything like that. And so when it comes to making change, in fact, several of my colleagues during that transition time emphasized to me that there were many things that they felt like we needed to change in order to accelerate our business and grow to the next stage. And they were expecting me to do that.
And in some ways, that's, if you remember, there was a whole push way back in the 80s around using foreign pressure on Japan to get change, Gaiatsu, this outside pressure. And it was surprising because politically, economically, for a lot of Japanese, because they are restrained, they owe people, they have obligations, history, connections, and so their ability to move very much pinned in. And so having the outside excuse of a pressure from America forcing change gave them the withal inside Japan to make some changes. So sometimes I'm just imagining myself that sometimes maybe it's easier for someone like you to come in and make a big change when people can accept that more easily than if maybe someone on the inside tried to do it. They'd have a lot more pushback, a lot more difficulty, or maybe some pasts, skirmishes and come back to haunt them, this type of thing.
I think that's very true. I think that's very true. And if you add on top of that the benefit that we have in this situation, which I think is important for other corporations who go through the same dynamic perhaps that you're just describing, that we have a team. I have a group of partners, most of whom are Japanese, and I have a set of very senior Japanese colleagues and partners that are an important part of this leadership team, an important part of our business, and I rely on them for many things that I need advice for, or that I simply am not the best position to do because I'm not Japanese. So I think that getting that balance right and that combination right, whether it's at the MD position or not. So my successor, for instance, will almost certainly be Japanese, I think. But just getting that balance right within that leadership team, I think, is important.
And what about leading very intelligent, competent, confident people who are operating at the top of the global field in their area, and trying to get them to follow you, take direction from you around the firm and where we're going, and trying to coalesce them to get behind what you're thinking we should be doing. I mean, I'm sure there's a huge collaborative element to the decision making. I understand that, but still, at the end of the day, you've got to take some people who are, possibly not so easy to handle and handle them. So how do you go about doing that?
It's a great question. If you take a step back, what you describe requires us to have a talent model and to invest in our training and in our culture and in our employee experience at a super high level. Because we have to make it extremely attractive for what we think is the best business talent that's out there. We have to. And so we in lots of different ways, in terms of training and capability building, collaboration, the things that we celebrate, trying to create a culture which has as little hierarchy as possible, creating a full meritocracy, having attractive benefits, not just financial compensation, but just other aspects of the job that make it attractive to be there, is super important, because for this kind of talent, it's a war for talent. It really is. So sure, we have a strong brand name, sure, but it's a war for talent. And we have to have a place that's attractive for people like that to be. We were very excited to get the position in OpenWorks, which is an online platform that's objective, people will rate their employers and so forth. We were the number one place to work for people coming out of school in Japan.
Oh, congratulations! That's a huge
which is
achievement.
huge. And that's we work really hard for that, because we have to be attractive. Now, on the other hand, the people that we have on balance are also extremely driven and motivated, which of course helps a lot in managing those kinds of teams. In general, people are very highly
Is that because they're self-motivating, self-directed, self-energized, and so for a lot of leaders, they have to bring some of this to the people and give them some help? But I'm sort of hearing what you're saying is they've already got all that. It's more a case of direction, perhaps, and coordination than trying to put those things in place for them, because they're already there. They're self-selecting in that sense. So in terms of getting coalescence around the direction, though, particularly when you mentioned before about change, which, in this country, I make the joke, Dave, about change. I say, Japanese love change. And people look at me like I'm completely off my rocker. And then I say, yes, they think the boss should change, the company should change, the client should change, their colleagues should change, and they should stay exactly the same. And that's the problem with change in this country. No one wants to change. So how has it gone since you've become managing director to, make some changes and get people behind it, in terms of the caliber of people you've got? As they're incredible people, I'm sure, but getting them to actually agree to it and then get behind it. What's worked to do that?
It's a great question. So I love the question too, because in the second third of my career, the majority of time that I spent was on leadership development and change management kinds of topics.
I see that in your resume, which is a bit of an irony when you've got to apply it to your own company, right?
I know. And sometimes that's the hardest place.
Exactly. The client, here's the best advice, but, are we going to do it? Look at the universities. Right. Universities are, hopeless, most of them.
That's right.
And they teach all this stuff, but they don't use any of it. It's
that's right. Bankers investing their own money. The list goes on and on. So it's difficult to consult for your own consulting company or run your own consulting company. So that's right. So I find this topic super fascinating. First of all, change is hard everywhere. Anywhere there's a human being, change is hard. In Japan, I feel like it's 2x hard. The things that work here are, in general, things that work in other places, but in different proportions and to different degrees. So one of those things, of course, is creating the need to create alignment and harmony here is so strong and so ingrained after centuries and centuries. Of course, sometimes a kick from the top or a very clear, decision from the top helps a lot. But the reality is that I've found that irrespective of what you say from the top, if you don't have that middle management behind you and the next couple of levels behind you, it doesn't matter what you say. Eventually, it's going to be water going around a rock, and it just is not going to hold. And so investing in time to engage those next couple of levels and give them an ownership stake in the future of what you're trying to do, and have them co-create at least parts of the future and of the answer. Have them be part of the solution, not just being spoken to, but engaged. I was doing that kind of work before in Europe. Here, it's like 2x as important as one level.
Yeah, well, nemawashi in the Japanese context of groundwork to prepare for a decision.
That's right.
But you think about it too. I was just reflecting that, those black and white, German Swiss, very clear, straight shooting. Again, trying to get a group of people like that who are very, very independent, very strong, to work together to come to a decision. I'm sure probably you were doing a lot of nemawashi back there before the meeting to make the decision, to make sure the meeting got the right decision. So probably that's at a high level. Nemawashi is probably needed everywhere, but Japan sort of institutionalized it maybe. That's the difference.
I think that's spot on. It is applicable everywhere in the world. That's my view. But here it is just to a much greater degree of sophistication. Let's put it that way.
And I guess also people here expect it too. I mean, probably, being an Australian, I don't think too many Australian leaders think about, right, I've got to go around and do some nemawashi with everyone and we'll get to a joint decision on this, where we're going. They may, but they don't possibly think like that. And certainly the people who are being consulted probably don't think like that either. They think we're going to get in the meeting room, we're going to have the debate, we're going to nut it out, we're going to make a decision, and we're going to go, which is normally how we do it. But the Japanese thinking would be, right, I expect to see Dave coming and talking to me about this decision that's coming up because I want to have my input before we even get in the room.
And if he doesn't, perhaps I'm offended.
Well, yes, exactly. Right. Why isn't he talking to me? Yeah.
That's right. So that's just been an absolutely fascinating process here. So I found in general that things have taken longer here to get off the ground, but once you get them off the ground, they're going to stay on the rails. A higher chance that they have staying power, once they get going.
I don't know about Bain, but with a lot of consulting companies, it's a bit of an up or out type of culture, that the cream rises to the top and the rest goes and works somewhere else. I don't know if that's how you guys do it over there, but I'm just thinking too, you've got your sort of high flyers and the sort of superstars up here, and then you've got analysts and you've got researchers and you've got people down the hierarchy who may not get to be the superstar, but they still play an important role. And then you have people who are quite junior coming in. As you said, the onboarding process, you pay a lot of attention to that. Best place to work is an incredible achievement. So again, congratulations on that. Kudos on that. But how about getting the whole team together? Because one part is getting the top group to fly together. But then, there's a support mechanism there. You have to rely on people. So what have you found works well to get every person in the whole organization empowered or feeling engaged or feeling valued and to be working hard? And do you have an up and out system or not?
So let me address both of those questions. Both are very good. So the up or out, look, you could say that it's mostly that way, simply because the way that that our segment of the industry works is it's a full meritocracy. And in order for it to be a full meritocracy, you have to earn your right at whatever level you are to be there and to stay there. Because if you continue without earning your right, then the growth machine sort of doesn't work anymore. And the talent that then is underneath you then cannot benefit from that full meritocracy, because then they have to then wait for whoever is above them to get out of the way. Now, that's not 100% true, what I'm telling you. We're nearly 20,000 people around the world now. It's a big company, and so there's some complexities to it. But in general, it's a full meritocracy because of that principle, primarily speaking. in terms of mobilizing kind of from top to bottom, yes, that's also super important. Also super important. I'll tell you a few things that I think about, but not the exhaustive list, but a few things that come to mind that techniques that you'll be very familiar with, I'm sure. One is using the bully pulpit to emphasize certain messages. If you want the place to be less hierarchical or more collaborative or things like that, then pay attention to what you say when you're in town hall meetings or class meetings or whatever it is. Pay attention to who you're celebrating and what you're celebrating and so forth, because that messaging will start to seep its way into the culture. A second is that I, as well as with my colleagues, so my lunch today, for example, was with 2 junior analysts. So I have once or twice a week, usually about once a week, I'll have a lunch reserved for anybody that wants to go out to lunch, and I emphasize the functional professionals and the more junior members of our staff, for example. It's a fun way for me to get to know people. It's an effective way for me to get some input and feedback from people that I normally may not spend as much time with. And it's also sending a signal to the organization, because people talk about that and they see that. That sends a signal that says that we don't love hierarchy here. And anyone can speak to anyone. And then the third thing I'd say is in my first, 2 years ago, we launched what we called a North Star program, which was, we have a strong global culture at Bain, but Japan, after all, is an island nation with a very strong language and culture. And so I felt like we needed an articulation of the kind of culture that we wanted to create in our business here and in our team here. Now, a fairly straightforward way of doing a process like that would be for the leadership team to get together in a room and hash it out, have a workshop and write a few things down, and then go on a communication campaign. Now, I said, wait a minute, we want to turn this thing on its head. So we set this up a bit like Noah's Ark, which was we take each level of the organization, different functions and different levels of the consulting hierarchy. And we formed a North Star committee that had equal members, kind of like the Senate or something like that, equal members and representation from each class. And it was their job in a series of discussions to come up with an articulation of the culture that we aspire to be in Bain, Japan. Now, where we ended up was a good place. Would it have been materially different if we were to do it just with the leadership team? Maybe, maybe not, in terms of the end, like articulation and words and so forth that we chose. But the difference was that by doing it this way with engagement from everyone, and of course the representatives on that committee were in charge of then going back offline and getting input from their peers in their respective classes. That process gave everybody a stake and everybody a voice in our future, and that made all the difference.
Which is not normally what happens, is it? Sort
not normally what happens.
Pontification from on high. And
then you communicate, communicate.
You're just on the receiving end passively, as opposed to having a chance to input ideas through your representatives at those different levels. That's very interesting.
Correct.
Yeah, often, we find this when we're doing leadership training, that the company will have vision, mission, values, etc. But when you test it, do they actually live them? And the first question I have is, if you can't remember it, I don't know how you're going to live it. So you ask them if they know them. I'm still struggling to find a company here that you're going to ask them, what's the vision of this company? No one knows it. What's the mission? No one knows it. Usually have 5 values. Collectively, 30 people come up with 2. That's it, So you've got to ask yourself, hard. This is all great. I mean, someone's put all this together, and possibly the people up on the top floor of the plush carpet on the nice big offices where the president and the C-suite live think that everyone top to bottom understands where we're going, what's our vision, mission, values, but in fact they don't. So this is very interesting, this sort of bottoming up the whole process in a way, which is getting that ownership. This is great.
Yeah, absolutely. The same thing can be said too for strategy in addition to culture and values. There was the head of our global strategy practice has a story from many, many years ago. It was actually from Phil Knight at Nike, maybe 30 years ago, something like that, where they were interviewing him, and and he introduced this idea of strategy on a hand. It's your same idea of, culturally and from your mission and so forth, you can't have any more than 5. But Phil, had the test of, listen, everybody here needs to be able to describe our strategy, which maybe is even harder than to describe our few values that we stand for on a hand. And if you can't do that, it's too complicated, people won't know. And he tells the story that in the room there with Phil, they heard this and they said, okay, well, that sounds great, Phil, is it really true? And, being the eccentric person that he is, he got up and says, all right, come with me, and starts walking down the hallway. I wasn't there. I just heard the story, and starts asking people. And they go down their hand and start to describe the strategy of Nike. So there is a value of simplicity, and there's a value also of co-creation and engaging people.
If you want to be successful as a leader, do the Leadership Training for Managers course. All companies need people who can both manage and lead. Leading people screams out for real skills in communication, dealing with all different types of people, being excellent at innovation, planning, delegation, handling mistakes, doing performance reviews really well, and inspiring and motivating the team. Do the Leadership Training for Managers course now in either Japanese or English. Are you doing business with Japan? Do you really know how things work? Japan Business Mastery provides the answers. Do you have the right networks and know how to create them? Do you know how to get on the same wavelength with Japanese buyers? Do you know what being trustworthy looks like from the Japanese perspective? Japan Business Mastery is based on more than 30 years' experience in Japan and will become your go-to guide. Want to succeed in Japan? Buy Japan Business Mastery now. So value in discipline too. I was fortunate enough to spend a week in Washington, D.C. at the Ritz-Carlton Training Center. And they have their group of golden principles, which are sort of a fundamental glue for how they think about treating the guests. And this is common around the world. And actually they came up with every shift would have a meeting where they'd go through this, and they had a little process they went through. And it was a good uniter of people across the globe. They're a multinational company, different locations, different hotels. And we do that here. Every day we have the Daily Dale. We call it the Daily Dale, Dale Carnegie. And we go through vision, mission, values. We have a whole bunch of other things we go through as well every single day, because I saw the value for the Ritz-Carlton of doing that every shift. And for example, one of the things we go through is one of Dale Carnegie's principles from his book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, or from the stress management, How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. We cycle through, there's 60 of these, so we cycle through them. But the person who's leading it, that's by rotation, it's not always me, it's by rotation, by just no hierarchy, that person will say what this means to me. So they bring their own spin, their own interpretation of that particular principle. So even though we cycle through the same 60 all the time, every single time it's different, because that person has a different take on it. So it keeps it fresh. So there's also that discipline too, isn't there, to actually have the capacity not only to go through the process, but then to have it such that the team stick with it and they don't forget it. Because one of the things is people come and go. And then, like we did the Daily Dale rigor of that a number of years ago. And there's still some people here, many people are still here when we did that, but there are a lot of people who weren't, who came in afterwards. So we have to inculcate them into the Daily Dale, and even though they weren't part of the ownership of making it, but they become used to doing it. We have our own little tribal crazy things we do to go with it just to make it really fun. But so that discipline part always strikes me as being an important aspect of things.
Spot on. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that, and probably some things that we can learn from you in that.
Well, anyhow, I'm happy to show you our Daily Dale. You'll laugh when you see it, because it's got quite a lot of elements to it. I keep adding to it. I've gone past 5, I can tell you that. In terms of getting ideas from people, now, you've got very, very smart people. You've got an incredible library of case studies and wisdom across the country boundaries and decades of time. And you're constantly reinventing, the solution to problems, because your clients bring you to those problems. It's not like you've been around for a long time. It's like us. We've been around since 1912. And people think, oh, you're an old company. No. We're constantly reinventing what we're doing, because the clients are constantly hitting us with something new. And so we've got to keep responding to that. And so same thing for you. But how do you go about when you've got a particular project, and I mean there's a project team, Have you come up with any particular mechanisms or ways to brainstorm or collectively come up with ideas on how you could approach that, or how you could come up with solutions which may be very innovative and get the whole brain power of the entire unit at work, as opposed to just a couple of superstars who have got a lot of experience, got a lot of ideas normally, but to get the whole group together? What works for you in terms of
Great
doing
question. The world of business, maybe they're just the world in general, has become so complicated. You just can't rely on a couple of smart people anymore. It's just too complicated for that. So the way I think about it is that there's a category of system-related things that you've got to invest in and get right. And then there's a set of cultural elements that you have to get right. On the system side, maybe the culture is more interesting, but quickly on the system side, we invest a huge amount, of course, in all of our knowledge management systems and so forth.
And you publish.
We publish stuff all the time.
This as well, which, I mean, that's, I think about the discipline and the rigor and the consistency to not only get the information, capture it, bring it back, write it up, get it out into the public domain. This is not easy, simple stuff, and yet you just keep doing it so well. That's really, for me, it's one of the most impressive things about the industry, and particularly your own company, what you do. So again, kudos for that. Well done.
Our business sort of depends on it. And one of the early applications of AI, for instance, internally, is you can imagine how giant our knowledge system is.
Yeah.
It's enormous, right?
How do you
Titanic.
search it? How do you index it? Yeah,
how do you search it? How do you index it? And so that's one of the early applications. We have a chatbot. We have a knowledge assistant that's AI powered that helps us with that, which is super powerful. On the cultural side, this is where all of the things around harnessing the power of diversity come into play, of having a culture that's not too hierarchical so that it doesn't stymie good ideas that may not come from the highest title that's in the room. Creating a culture where we say, one of the expressions we have is that the magic happens on the whiteboard. It's when a small group of people get together and they put ideas up there and then they build on each other's ideas. So, how do you create culture that's like that? Some of the things we talked about already.
Because, in my experience, if you get into a room with Japanese and you've got idea generation coming up, everyone's scanning the room. Oh, he's male, I'm female, I should wait till he speaks. Oh, that they joined before me, I should hold back till they speak. Oh, that person's older than me, I should hold back till they speak. So there's all, again, this suppression of self in Japan to fit in with a hierarchy, but in the ideation element, you can't have that. You've got to have every idea come out. You've got to have a system for people to be able to, don't be suppressed by self-limiting beliefs about what you can do, can't do, but go forth, be bold, and put your idea up. So how, and particularly in Japan, what have you found works to get, I don't know if the Bain Japanese team is just so culturally different they don't fit into that Japanese system or not, or do you have to overcome that? How do you get around that?
It's still a challenge for us, no question about it, and I think we're chipping away at it slowly but surely. Will probably always be a challenge. In little things. So in little things that I'm sure you'll be familiar with in the world of executive coaching, when you're the more senior person in a room, that micro dynamic, you're 5 people sitting around a table, let's say you're a team, and that micro dynamic of, first of all, the more senior person asking somebody, what do you think? That's the first step. But then the second step is even more important, which is that after they have the courage to say something, even if it's not a great idea or whatever it is, you've got to, in front of everybody else, praise them and say thank you and build on that idea and then ask somebody else. You've got to do that. If you sort of respond to their comment with, but the problem with that is X, Y, and Z because I've tried it before and what would be better is da-da-da, and you start talking. And maybe you're right.
Yes.
Maybe you're right.
Yes.
But it doesn't matter because you've just killed and nobody else is going to say a darn thing.
Looking at his shoes very intently from that point onwards, drop the eye contact.
So that dynamic of leadership training is really important. There's a dynamic of using Net Promoter System, which is something that we came up with years ago at Bain, but having a feedback loop that's regular. I mean, every week we're having case team meetings where there's surveys and ombudsman speaking for the team, where we debrief on the process of how the team dynamic is working.
Wow.
Along multiple different dimensions.
Well, that's
this is not just after the project, after a few months.
This is on the way through.
Every week as we go through, having a discussion and say, well, okay, how's our sustainability score this
This is
week?
like
How's our efficiency?
sort of like an independent view on what the team's doing. So the team is not necessarily having to do it themselves. Someone's coming in and looking at it, or they're coming from internal.
It's coming from internal. The team's doing it. So first of all, it's anonymous.
Oh, okay, right.
But it's coming from the team.
Right.
Then there's an ombudsman
Within
conveying
the team?
within the team
Right.
that is
Okay.
conveying that and facilitating that discussion.
Right.
So we still, I wish that we didn't have to make everything anonymous like that, but we find that we still have to make one step of it anonymous to get some things out. And then we have an ombudsman to facilitate a discussion that is productive, where people feel like they slowly then can start to say things also in the open, right, with people. So that's the dynamic, and we do that every week, every team, all the time. Now, if there are issues in that team, and their scores are low for a long time, and things like that, that will trigger a red flag for me and for our HR team. And that's to your point about having an outside person come in. Then we would have an outside person come in, first talk with the leadership team, say, hey, what's going on here? So there's some kind of intervention that we need to do. So we are on top of that all the time.
That
is
incredible.
it perfect? No.
That's
But
impressive.
feedback after the fact,
Too
limited
late.
help. Too late.
Too late. It's already done.
We've got to be able to course correct as we're going, and that's important.
And that's interesting too, in terms of often with leadership. We call it the sort of the birthday issue. That we wait until it's their birthday to say happy birthday and make them happy and give them a present. And same with projects. You wait till the end of the project to have the birthday party. And all the happiness happens there. But what happens on the way through? And so again, if some people are a little bit less bolshy than others and they're a bit more reserved, a bit more analytical, they may not speak up so quickly, they may be digesting very, very deeply what's going on, and they're going to come out with something eventually in the context of that time to encourage people all the way through and praise people all the way through and reward people on the way through, instead of waiting, okay, it's your birthday today, happy birthday, here's your present. That's the end, right?
Yeah,
it's
that's
a bit
right.
too late. So you've sort of
Spot
taken
on.
that to another level, which I love that. That's really very, very, very good. What are the things you found works well in terms of getting ideas from people? I guess particularly also, sometimes people are the very, very, I'll say the bottom. I mean, you're trying to be not hierarchical, I get that, but still, people who are not particularly
More junior
high status,
levels,
or more junior level, getting the ideas. And I just think of an example I read somewhere about, it was an American country club, and the directors were having this problem of people were taking the shampoo with them when they went to have a shower after playing golf. And they're thinking about all these things, and someone says, look, let's ask the person who takes care of the bathrooms what they think. He said, I got it, no problem, I'll fix that straight away. And boom, problem vanished immediately. And they're like dumbfounded. These are directors, they're high-powered business people in the local community, worth a lot of dough and the sort of lowest person on the totem pole. He said, I just take the caps off the bottles. You can't transport it. And that was the thing. Again, someone at the very bottom, very practical, just take the caps off the bottles, they can't take it home with them. It's easy. But again, sometimes we're thinking maybe a too high level, too complex level, and someone at the bottom may be seeing something very simple, and often that person may be close, it depends on the industry, may be the closest to the consumer, maybe the closest to the end user, they may be in a particular demographic or an age band where they can identify, have more information for that particular thing. Someone my age would have. So again, what have you found works to get the bottom, I'll say the bottom, but the more junior
the more
people
junior or
involved?
less experienced. Yeah, so super important. The first thing that comes to mind is the way in which we organize different initiatives and activities, right, or in our business here in Japan, is really important. The assumption, when I first moved here, this was one of the many differences, as you were asking earlier, that I noticed, which was there's an assumption that anything that happens and there's a team formed around any sort of initiative, well, it needs to have a partner, sponsoring it, or a partner in charge, or a partner involved somehow, some way. That was just the assumption. There needs to be a sensei somewhere, in whatever that activity is. But if you look carefully at majority of those activities, I don't see there's any reason at all that you need to have a partner necessarily in our business be part of that. And so we look for opportunities to empower and to put people that are less experienced in that, in that hierarchy, in charge of stuff and have them do it. And if they need a roadblock to be removed, or if they need additional funding, or things like that, and they need to ask for sponsorship from me or other partners, then great, come and ask it. But let's have them run it and be in charge of it.
So you're giving the leadership opportunity at a very early stage in the organization.
The earlier, the better. The earlier, the better. And that goes for our own organization, whatever office initiatives or celebration events or different things that we do, improvement initiatives that we do. It also goes for the work that we do with our clients, right? So we have any given team working with a client will have somebody that's older and more senior, and somebody that's less old and less senior. As much as we can, we try to find opportunities to push up the more junior folks in our ranks, to give them opportunities to meet, to lead a meeting, to facilitate part of a workshop, to do things when they're ready for a little bit of a stretch, to push that into that role, because that's how they accelerate their learning. If you don't do that and you're holding back and assuming that only the senior person in the room talks, or only the senior person is going to make the presentation, or any of that sort of thinking, then you're going to hold back the development of your talent, and they're just going to develop more slowly.
Or they're going to go somewhere else.
Or they're going to go somewhere else.
Advance more fast.
Where they can advance more quickly. That's exactly right.
Wow.
Okay. I recall a situation in San Francisco early in my career where I was just in that transition of moving from an individual contributor, like an analyst, up to a management sort of position. And I was in a meeting it was just me and a senior Bain partner, and we were friends. He was a coach of mine. And we were with a client who was also much older than me. And it was on a topic that I was not an expert in. And I didn't say much in that meeting. I didn't think it was a big deal. And we come out afterwards, and the partner, my friend Paul, he says, Dave, that wasn't a manager in there. That wasn't a leader in there. You do that again, you'll never be promoted.
Ooh, wow.
Now,
there's some
actually,
feedback.
he was a friend, and he said that. He always says that with a little bit of a smile, and we had a lot of affection for each other. He was a guy who told me exactly what was written on the back of my shirt. And then he goes on and explains to me, puts his arm around me and so forth. He says, listen, you've got to say something. And I was giving you every opportunity and every trying to pass you the ball all the time. And it doesn't mean you have to have the right answer all the time. You can ask a question. You can summarize what you've heard. There's all different ways in which you can engage in the conversation. But listen, man, you've got to have a point of view. It doesn't mean you have to be a jerk about it or overly aggressive about it, but you've got to engage. And that's important for you as you become a leader for others, to give them that chance. It's also important for you to take that chance and to step up and do that. So, that's
very
what we try to do
wise.
with our folks.
Very wise. You're fortunate to get that advice at an early stage, and I'm
I
sure
was.
that is probably why you're the managing partner today.
Oh,
here
I
in Tokyo.
don't know about
part
that.
Part of that escalation process.
I was thankful that I had a guy, I had a mentor at that time who would tell me what was written on the back of your shirt.
Yeah. And what about trust? I mean, getting trust anywhere is important. Getting trust in Japan, I think, is particularly important.
Yes.
So what have you found has worked well since you've been here to get people to trust you?
You gotta follow through on what you say. That's first. You gotta be consistent with a handful of principles, whether they are behavioral attributes or cultural attributes and so forth that you're trying to espouse, or elements of your strategy and your business ambition. You've got to stay the course. Now that's true anywhere in the world, but in Japan, it's not like I figured everything out. I'm learning every week. But demonstrating, particularly as a foreigner, that you're in it for the long haul, that you're not just going to go with the wind, that there's some things that you're going to stick to, and you're here for building the balance sheet of the business, and you're here for the long-term health of the business. And yes, there are short-term things you're trying to do, but it's all in service of a long-term vision. I found that that's really important, particularly as I work with multinational corporations here. We are that way too. And they have a mixture sometimes of expat leaders who will come in, do some rotation, and then leave. That's very dangerous, right? You have somebody who comes in for 3 years or something and then leaves, and you have employees that have been there for 20, 30 years. They've seen lots of this before. This too shall pass is what they're thinking in their head.
Wait them out.
And they may be a good guy or gal, but we can always wait them out. And so building the consensus, of course, is important, but that element of trust, of being reliable, that you're going to do what you say, and there are some long-term principles that you're holding to, and you're respecting the culture, building consensus in the right way, not coming in with American, well, I say that as a dual American Swiss citizen, but not coming in with that negative stereotypical image. Just put it that way. Not all Americans are like this, but of coming in with a little bit more of a low context, slash and burn kind of approach.
Now that's
important.
That's interesting. If you have the freedom to be like that, and I'm just thinking about in some cases, the organization in Japan hasn't been going well. And often, a very classic thing is they've employed the retired shacho or retired president of another company to run their company. And then after about 5 years, they realize nothing's happening. And then they say, right, Dave, you've got to go to Japan and fix it. Got to get in there and turn that around. We're not making any money. Your job, turn it around. So you come with this imprimatur from headquarters, which is change agent, and your time frame is usually tight. So sometimes that balance of respecting the culture, understanding how things work here, getting your feet under the desk and understanding the playing field, sometimes that's very compressed for some people. So any advice for people who are in that situation where actually you're under the gun to get some results quickly and your career is based on how you perform, to be able to do that, but also knowing you're only going to be there for 3 years, not blow the whole damn thing up and ruin the relationship with all the clients and create a massive big hole in the market here. So how do you get that balance right?
So great question. First, I just want to convey that I empathize a lot with your question and statement, because I feel, working with our clients, I feel like I've got, and the angel and the devil, or let's just say two angels, sitting on both shoulders here. And one is whispering, hey, speed up here, because, you've got a job, you have a business fiduciary responsibility to your stakeholders, et cetera, and you've got to get going. And on the other side, it's, wait a minute. Don't be a bull in a china shop. It's not going to work. Slow down, listen, be respectful. There might be something you're not understanding about the situation and so forth. And it's this constant tension between the two. Constant. Both are important. Of the many levers that you can use, the first one that comes to mind, and I'll just keep it short on your question, is the idea of legacy and tapping in to Japanese executives, well, to any human beings, to any leaders, desire to leave some kind of a positive legacy. Now, even if that shacho is there for 3 years and is a foreigner, let's say, being able to tap into the people around them, to tap into what's the kind of legacy that we want to leave as a leadership team, as an individual, let's say CEO or chairman, as a company, what's the legacy that we want to leave to our business, to our shareholders, to our customers, to our employees, to our country. Especially senior Japanese executives, they absolutely understand what's going on in the economy here. They understand the price to book ratio. They understand all these things. And the majority of them, in my experience, are legitimately trying to leave things in a better place than where they saw them at the beginning. Not everything in the system is helping them to do that and not making it easy for them. But if you can tap into people's desire to pay it forward and to leave some kind of a positive legacy, what do you want to be remembered for? I find that to be really powerful if you can get that kind of hook in, particularly in Japanese culture, because it's so long-term oriented. They play the long game. It's the long game. Any of the big older institutions here, big conglomerates and so forth, they have such proud histories. And if you come in and disrespect that history, and everything is short term, we have to turn everything around. In the next 2 to 3 years, we have to change everything. Well, that might be true. You have a lot of things to change. But if you're not tapping into that rich history that they have, those strong roots, that legacy that they've already built, and then paint a picture of the legacy that they can leave behind as a proud institution, then I think you're going to get in trouble. So even if you were here for a short period of time, the narrative and the thinking, the engagement has got to be anchored in something positive in the past and the legacy, and then attaching to some kind of compelling vision in the future that has people feeling inspired about the legacy that they can leave personally and collectively.
And also the people who are there have been contributing to that situation. You know, business doesn't turn out to have results here by accident. People have been actually part of that. And they've, in some ways, by talking about this as a disaster, you're actually saying your work has been useless. You are useless. Very hard to get people behind you if you start talking like that to people. So it's a very tricky balance.
If you've been there for 25 years and a new foreign executive comes in and says, just all talks about the problems and all the things you need to change, you know, how do you feel? How do you feel? You're an engineer building trains or whatever it is. You feel, well, what in the heck did I do in the last 25 years? Was it all worthless? I hope not. I don't think so. But this clown doesn't seem to think it was worth anything.
Yeah, and Japanese are very proud. I mean, I think every country people are proud, but I think for Japan, they have a very long history. They've been through the war. They came out from the war. They rebuilt the whole country. They've done a tremendous job. There's a lot to be proud about. And so,
absolutely,
respect some of that. Apart from that, thinking about advice for senior leaders coming in from outside. So someone rings you up, hey, Dave, I've got this big job in Japan. They want me to go over there and run the organization, but I don't speak Japanese. I don't know Japan. How could I be successful? What advice would you give me, Dave? What are some things, apart from what we've already talked about, would you suggest to them?
Let's see. The first thing that comes to mind is you've got to be up for the adventure. So you've got to be open to listening, to understanding the culture, to understanding the way that things work and so forth, understanding things that are different, be open to things that are different. If you're an expat that's going to come over here and complain about how all the reasons why things are not the same as wherever your home is, you might as well not even come. You're not going to have any success here.
Stay where you are.
Stay where you are. If you have the expression of having a growth mindset, if you're just more open and willing to listen and learn, and then yes, use your experience and leadership skills, no question. But you've got to be willing to listen and learn. That's the first step. That's the first step for sure. And then from there, we've talked about many of those things. One of the other things that comes to mind is you've got to build. As the old expression goes, you do have to build a winning coalition. You've got to build a group of a handful of people around you that are going to be your mates, through that journey. Mostly probably Japanese, but in whatever form they are, whatever diversity is appropriate in that team. You can't do it alone. You cannot do it alone. It's a collective. And this is one of those roots about Japanese society here that goes all the way back centuries about cultivating rice here, where you couldn't do it with just a couple families. It forced everybody into that sense of community. So that's the next thing that would come to mind.
What about language? You mentioned before that you didn't speak Japanese. You're coming here wondering, what value am I going to bring to the organization? Should they learn Japanese? Does it matter?
Absolutely. And yes. Now, let me put a caveat on that.
Okay.
So I speak only basic Japanese now. So I'd say that the bare minimum is that in order to respect a culture and in order to understand, the language is a window into cultures.
It is, isn't it? Yeah.
So if you do not have the respect to learn the basics of getting around town and basic social introductions and niceties and so forth, that's a warning signal for me that maybe this is not the right place for you. So yes, you do need to learn. Now, on the other hand, at my age and with the things that I have going on in life, and my memory is not as good as it was before, my ability to quickly get up to business proficiency is not so high. So I cannot conduct business in Japanese. That for sure is a limiter, no question about it, but it doesn't rule you out. There's still an important role for global expertise and global advisors to play. Think about it. The majority of the large cap Japanese corporates are looking for growth outside of Japan.
They are.
And they're competing against global competitors. And so having a perspective of that global competition, being able to put it in the context of Japan and providing some of that more global advice is of high value.
Well, they talk about Galapagos Island here as the metaphor for a closed-off environment where, Galapagos Islands off the coast of South America has come up with very unique fauna and flora. that's not found anywhere else, and it's that isolation. And they talk about that with Japan, that one of the dangers for them is we become isolated and we can't tap into what's going on globally enough. So companies like yourselves and ourselves too, we're able to bring in that global best practice, bring in ideas, freshen things up, give them some more scope to think about things. We provide value for that. And so I guess same thing in terms of, for a company, a Japanese company, the fact you don't speak Japanese, but you've got really interesting ideas, well, the really interesting ideas part's more important than the Japanese level, isn't it? So there's some other things there. Anything else, any other advice you'd give them?
Any other advice I'd give them? My thought goes to the personal side, which is family. You're not going to be happy here at work if you're not happy at home.
That's absolutely right.
That's for sure.
I don't know if you have this expression in America or Switzerland. We say in Australia, happy wife, happy life.
That is true. And if you extend that,
happy spouse, I should be probably.
Happy spouse would be the right way to do it.
Happy spouse, happy life.
That would be the right way to do it. In the middle of our careers, my wife was earning a lot more money than me, and I was following in her coattails. There's an expression that's similar to that I've always liked, that the dean of our business school gave on the commencement speech, which was that there's no success in the workplace that can compensate for failure at home. I think that's very good life advice, which is why it's so important. Actually, it's good business advice too. Even though the life advice part of it is more important. The business advice part of it's important too, because if you're not going to be bringing your best self to work if your family situation is not settled. So if you have children, getting that right, your spouse, if you have a significant other, getting that right is really important. And
that's not an easy thing, because you come here, the pace of things in terms of business here is very fast. There's a lot to comprehend. You've got lots of things to do. You've got to keep headquarters happy. You've got to coordinate around the world. You've got to get the team going here. There's a lot going on. And then the family part sort of gets easily shunted off to the side and then blows up, and then you blow up. So, yes,
that's the risk.
That's the risk, isn't it?
I think, the preamble to this statement, this advice that he gave said, well, in my position, I have the privilege of going around and talking to many alumni all around the world. This was at Harvard, so he's got alumni all around the world that have been very successful in their different career paths and so forth. And he was talking about how common it was for him to hear statements of regret from these, on paper, very successful individuals. And those regrets were most often with regard to their families at the expense of their career. And so he had heard this enough times.
There's a pattern there.
To see that there's a pattern there, and there's a pattern not because people are bad, because it's an easy force of gravity that sort of pulls you in if you don't act against it.
What's your definition of leadership, Dave?
My definition of leadership, there's an old Latin expression that I like, because I'm a student of history, and let me see if I remember it on the spot here. I won't pronounce it exactly right, but in necessaris unitas, in dubis libertas, in I can't remember then the last one. The last one, charitas. So directly translated, it's unity in what is important, it's liberty in what is doubtful, and it's charity in everything. Omnibus. So there you go. Everything is omnibus. Okay. And the business application, that's the direct definition.
Yeah.
This is old Latin expression in Latin, and I think what it means for me in business is, first of all, the unity in the things that are most important. That's what we've been talking about around alignment and cohesion and the power of consensus and getting the best ideas on the table and so on and so forth, right?
Yeah.
Investing in that, I think, is extremely important for a leader. The second one, I think, taps into what we now refer to as DEI, actually.
Yes.
Which is when the answer is not so certain, which is all the time. Yeah. When things are quite uncertain, you need liberty of thought. You need liberty of mind. And you need to be able to access that that breadth of thinking and that breadth of experience and so forth. If you can't do that and you're depending all on your own IQ, I think you're limiting yourself significantly. And then the third one, which is in omnibus charitas, charity in everything, is I just simply believe is the right way to live life, which is be kind, be slow to judge, be slow to anger, and be quick to praise, and be charitable in the things that you do. And you'll get the most out of the people around you if you do.
That is not how business used to be. When I grew up in business, the boss was a tyrant, and you had to work hard, and you got no praise, and expectation of getting paid. So this whole tough love, this whole ethos has really changed, I think, in the last maybe 10, 15 years. And so that idea of charity and thing I find, and I'm guilty as anyone else, is expecting people at a certain age and stage to be like you are now.
Yeah.
With your years of experience more than them, and you look at what they're doing, you're not happy with that, but you forget, well, hang on a minute, pal. What were you like at that age and stage? Were you didn't know all the things you know now? Why are you applying a double standard to them that you never actually put on yourself? So just ease up a bit there and be a bit more charitable with how people are developing and be more cooperative to help them learn. So sometimes bosses forget that, and I think I'm guilty. I'm putting my hand up as guilty.
It's an unconscious bias that all human beings have. So that's the first step, is recognizing that we all have a tendency to do that. And so if you're conscious about that, then you can start to shift. And I think, so from a macroeconomic standpoint or geopolitical standpoint, social standpoint, what you describe is, I think, only going to become more important everywhere, but in particular in Japan. Think about the demographic shifts here and the shift from, I'll paint a simple picture of the world of the power of the employer and the power of the employee. The power of the employee is going to go up. That war for talent that we experience all the time at Bain, that's going to extend to more and more businesses, that war for talent.
Yep.
And so, you're a tyrant, they'll go somewhere else.
Exactly. I call it the first true free agent employment environment in Japan. Like we have the free agency system in baseball, and took Japan a long time to allow people to be free agents in baseball. And for many they aren't still, but that working employee has the free agency and options. And, it's really relatively recent that mid-career hiring was an acceptable thing, because normally it's university or high school, and you go right through your career, and if you go off the track, there's no way coming back, and you're sort of now in a second tier, and you can't go back where you were. And Daiichi, I think it was Daiichi Securities in Hokkaido, was it, that crashed, and good people lost their jobs, and they then got re-employed. It was the first time that it actually happened. It started to change the concept of mid-career hires had been something seen as negative before, to being, well, and then you had Lehman shock. Of course, a lot of good people lost their jobs, or on the street for Lehman. And so this changed Japan, which wasn't like that. So, I think we're all moving in the right direction. Now, we've covered a lot of things here. You are a very, very key person in what you're doing, and a key person in the company. Is there anything about leading in Japan which I haven't asked you, which we should possibly dwell on at the end here? Anything we haven't got to yet that you think is important?
We covered it briefly, but the point that I'd like to emphasize perhaps at the end is that for non-Japanese coming into this country, it is easy to see the first things that you see are differences, and the first things that you see in a business environment can be frustrating. So I don't defend any of that, so that's true. But it is so important to keep a balanced perspective and an open mind to make sure that you see the other side of that coin. And now, I don't even know the whole other side of the coin. I've only been here for 3 years, but I'm learning more every week. But you've got to be open to understanding both sides of that situation, of that context. If you're too quick to judge, you are missing all kinds of information. You're not reading the room, right, as the expression goes, and you make mistakes and you get frustrated. So I think that balance is super important.
Yeah, I have a metaphor for that. I say that you arrive in Japan, you're out swimming in this warm lake. It's like a Scottish loch or something. It's a warm lake, but it's enveloped in fog. And you can hear things, and you sort of roughly make out shapes, but you can't see anything. Then after a while, you stay here longer, the fog starts to lift a little bit and you realize, oh, that's an island over there. Oh, that's a tree. And then eventually the fog completely lifts and then you see a lot more things. And then it's time to get on the plane and go to the next assignment, which is one of the problems with Japan, as you said. You've got to have a little bit of time perspective here. And you try and short circuit things too quickly, you may find yourself in big trouble. But Dave, it's been fabulous talking with you. Thank you very much for your time. I have to stress that Dave came out on a cold, sleet, wet day from his office to join us here in the High Performance Centre for Dale Carnegie. So we really appreciate that. And please join us again for our next episode of Japan's top business interviews.